The rooftop bar of the Grand Pacific Hotel buzzed with energy as 5 longtime friends gathered for their annual reunion. The city lights twinkled below, creating a perfect backdrop for what would become a life-changing evening. At the center of the group sat Raj, a 32-year-old venture capitalist known for his quick decisions and expensive taste. 10 years since college, and you're still scared of commitment, teased Dev, swirling his whiskey. The group had been giving Raj a hard time about his latest breakup, his third this year. The autumn breeze carried their laughter across the rooftop, mixing with the soft jazz playing in the background. Raj adjusted his designer jacket, a habit he'd developed whenever he felt defensive. It's not about being scared. I just haven't found the right person. He took a sip of his drink, the premium scotch warming his throat. His friends exchanged knowing looks. They'd heard this excuse countless times before. Right person? You mean someone who meets your impossible checklist? Arjun chimed in, pulling out his phone. Let's see, must love spontaneous trips to Europe, understand venture capital jargon, and look like they just stepped off a magazine cover. The group burst into laughter, except for Raj, who felt his pride taking a hit. The night wore on, and with each round of drinks, the conversation grew more animated. The city below seemed to pulse with energy, almost as if it knew something momentous was about to happen. That's when Karen, the most successful lawyer among them, leaned forward with a dangerous glint in his eyes. Let's make this interesting, he said, placing his glass on the table with a soft clink. You're always talking about how you could settle down if you wanted to. Prove it. The group fell silent, their attention captured by the challenge in Karen's voice. Raj felt the familiar rush of adrenaline he usually got before closing a big deal. What exactly are you suggesting? He asked, his competitive nature already peaked. The lights from the surrounding buildings cast shadows across their faces, adding drama to the moment. Marry the next single woman you meet, Karen declared. Stay married for at least 1 year. The proposal hung in the air like the smoke from their cigars. The other friends leaned in, suddenly very interested in where this was going. And what do I get when I win? Raj asked, emphasizing when with his characteristic confidence. He loosened his tie, feeling the effects of the evening's drinks. If you succeed, Karen smiled, I'll give you my restored 1965 Mustang. The group gasped. They all knew how much Karen loved that car. But if you fail, he continued, your entire vintage car collection goes to charity. The stakes were high. Raj's car collection was worth millions, carefully curated over years of successful deals and smart investments. Each vehicle told a story of his rise to success, from his first bonus car to his latest auction victory. You're crazy if you think I'd risk my entire collection, Raj scoffed, but his voice carried a hint of uncertainty. The challenge had struck a nerve, not just because of the cars, but because of what his friends really thought of him. Are you afraid? Dev pushed, knowing exactly which buttons to press. The great Raj, who closes million-dollar deals without breaking a sweat, scared of a little marriage. The combination of alcohol, wounded pride, and years of friendly competition finally tipped the scales. Raj stood up, slightly unsteady, and raised his glass. Fine. You're on. 1 year of marriage, starting with the next single woman I meet. The friends quickly drafted the terms on a napkin, their handwriting getting messier as they added more conditions. The contract was simple but binding. Raj had to propose within 3 months of meeting the woman, the marriage had to last at least 1 year, and most importantly, he couldn't tell her about the bet. As they signed, the napkin turned contract, using their phones' flashlights to see clearly in the dimming rooftop light. None of them realized how this drunken bet would change not just Raj's life, but all of theirs. To love. They toasted, clinking their glasses together. The city hummed below them, indifferent to the life-altering pact just made above its streets. As the night wrapped up and they parted ways, Raj's confidence began to waver slightly. He stood at the rooftop's edge, looking out at the city lights, wondering if he just made the biggest mistake of his life, or if this was the beginning of something extraordinary. Little did he know, as he waited for his driver to bring his car around, that tomorrow morning would bring him face to face with his fate. The warm autumn night wrapped around him like a comfortable blanket, hiding the fact that his life was about to take an unexpected turn, one that would teach him more about love, truth, and himself than any business deal ever could. As he slid into the back seat of his luxury car, Raj checked his phone one last time. A message from Karen popped up. "Hope you're ready to say goodbye to those cars. Clock starts tomorrow." Raj smirked and typed back a confident reply, even as a tiny voice in his head wondered if he finally let his pride write a check his heart couldn't cash. Morning sunlight streamed through the windows of Bean and Brew Cafe, doing nothing to help Raj's pounding headache. He dragged himself here in search of the strongest coffee they had, trying to piece together the events of last night. The weight of his phone felt heavier than usual, filled with congratulatory messages from his friends about the big bet. "Just great," he muttered, rubbing his temples. He was wearing the same expensive suit from last night, though considerably less crisp now. The cafe buzzed with its usual morning crowd. Young professionals tapping away on laptops, elderly couples sharing quiet conversations over steaming cups, and students cramming for exams. As he stood in line, Raj scrolled through his messages, each one making his stomach sink further. The bet wasn't just a dream, it was very real, and the stakes were enormous. His prized car collection, worth millions, hung in the balance. He was so absorbed in his phone that he didn't notice when the line moved forward, causing the person behind him to bump into his back. "Oh no!" a soft voice exclaimed as something cold splashed across his expensive shirt. Raj spun around, ready to snap at whoever had just ruined his designer clothes, but the words died in his throat. Standing there, looking mortified, was a young woman in paint-splattered overalls, holding a now-empty cup of iced tea. Her dark hair was pulled back in a messy bun, with colored pencils stuck through it like makeshift hairpins. "I'm so sorry," she said, frantically reaching for napkins. "I thought the line was moving, and I was trying to balance my sketchbook, and—" Raj found himself staring at her hands as she dabbed at his shirt. They were stained with different colors, like a painter's palette. "It's fine," he heard himself say, surprising even himself with his calm tone. "I needed an excuse to change anyway." She looked up, relief flooding her face, and that's when their eyes properly met. Hers were a warm brown, crinkled at the corners from what he could tell was a habit of smiling. "I'm Priya," she said, still holding the napkins like a peace offering. "And I still feel terrible. Let me buy you a coffee to make up for it." The universe, it seemed, had a sense of humor. The first single woman he met after the bet had to be someone who'd just ruined his favorite shirt. Raj opened his mouth to decline. She clearly wasn't his type, with her artistic mess and casual attitude. But then his phone buzzed again. Another message from Karen. "Tick-tock, time's wasting." "Actually," Raj found himself saying, "I'd like that. I'm Raj." He watched as she ordered them both coffee, noting how she chatted easily with the barista, asking about his kids by name. She seemed to carry a warmth that made everyone around her smile. They found a small table by the window, sunlight dancing across the surface as they talked. Priya, he learned, was an illustrator working on children's books. She showed him her sketchbook, pages filled with whimsical characters and colorful scenes that seemed to come alive on paper. "This is what I was working on when I accidentally attacked you with my tea," she laughed, pointing to a half-finished drawing of a dancing elephant wearing a tutu. "I've got a deadline for this series next week, and I tend to get lost in my own world when I'm creating." Raj found himself genuinely interested, despite his initial judgment. Her passion for her work reminded him of his early days, before success had made him cynical. "How did you get into illustration?" he asked, surprising himself with his genuine curiosity. The next hour flew by as Priya shared stories about her journey, from selling sketches in college to finally landing a contract with a publishing house. She spoke with her hands, gesturing enthusiastically, occasionally leaving tiny smudges of color on the table. "Oh no, look at the time," she suddenly exclaimed, gathering her things. "I've got a meeting with my publisher in 20 minutes. She stood up, slinging her worn leather bag over her shoulder. "Thanks for being so understanding about the shirt. Most people would have been furious." Before she could leave, Raj heard himself say, "Would you like to have dinner sometime?" The words came out before he could analyze them, before he could remind himself about his usual type or his carefully maintained image. Priya paused, studying him with those warm eyes. "You know what? Yes, but fair warning, I might spill something on you again." She scribbled her number on a page of her sketchbook, tore it out, and handed it to him. The paper had little doodles around the edges. As she left, Raj looked down at the number in his hand. The bet loomed in his mind, but somehow it didn't seem as important as it had an hour ago. He carefully tucked the paper into his wallet next to his platinum credit cards and business cards, where it looked charmingly out of place. His phone buzzed again. Another message from his friends asking for updates. Raj looked at the spot where Priya had been sitting, a few colored pencil shavings still scattered on the table like confetti. For the first time since making the bet, he didn't feel like he was facing a challenge. Instead, he felt like he might be starting an adventure. As he finally headed to his office, still wearing his tea-stained shirt, Raj realized he hadn't even taken a photo of Priya to show his friends as proof of meeting the bet's first requirement. Somehow, that detail had completely slipped his mind during their conversation. The thought should have worried him, but instead, it made him smile. The next 3 months passed like pages turning in one of Priya's storybooks. Raj found himself living 2 lives, one in the sleek corporate world of venture capital, and another in Priya's world of color and creativity. Their first dinner date had turned into dozens more, each one revealing new layers to their unexpected connection. "You really never had street food before?" Priya asked one evening, watching as Raj cautiously approached a local food cart. They were in the arts district, where string lights crisscrossed overhead and music drifted from nearby cafes. Raj, still in his business suit, looked comically out of place. "My usual restaurants have Michelin stars," he admitted, making Priya laugh. But he tried the spicy noodles anyway, and his delighted expression made her smile. It became their thing. Priya introducing Raj to the simple pleasures he'd forgotten about while climbing the corporate ladder. Back at his office, his friends kept asking for updates about the bet girl, as they called her. Raj found himself sharing less and less, keeping their precious moments private. He didn't tell them about teaching Priya to drive his precious vintage cars, or how she'd drawn tiny cartoons of each one, bringing them to life in her sketchbook. "Your cars have personalities," she'd said, showing him her drawings. "This one's definitely grumpy, and this one's the happy-go-lucky teenager." Raj had never thought of his prized possessions that way, but now he couldn't unsee it. One rainy Sunday, while they were sheltering in her tiny art studio, Priya showed him how to paint. His first attempt was terrible, but she kept it anyway, pinning it to her inspiration board alongside her professional work. "Everyone starts somewhere," she said, paint smudged on her cheek. Raj felt something shift in his chest, a warmth he couldn't explain. Their worlds began to blend in unexpected ways. Priya started joining Raj at some of his business dinners, charming his clients with her genuine interest in their stories. She didn't try to fit in with designer clothes or practiced small talk. Instead, she brought her own magic, often sketching quick portraits on napkins that his clients treasured more than any expensive gift. "You're different with her," Dev noticed during a rare group lunch. Raj just shrugged, but he knew it was true. The designer suits still hung in his closet, but now they shared space with paint-stained t-shirts. His carefully scheduled calendar had margin notes filled with silly doodles Priya would add when he wasn't looking. 2 months into their relationship, during a quiet moment in his apartment, Priya was curled up on his leather couch, sketching. "What are you working on?" he asked, sitting beside her with 2 cups of tea, something he'd never stocked before meeting her. "A new story idea," she said, showing him the rough drawings. "It's about a businessman who learns to see the world in color." She looked at him meaningfully, and Raj felt his heart skip. The bet suddenly felt like a distant memory, something from another life. That night, after Priya had gone home, Raj stood in his garage, looking at his car collection. Each vehicle gleamed under the lights, worth a fortune. He'd always seen them as symbols of his success, but now they felt different. Now they were the cars Priya had given personalities to, the ones they'd taken on spontaneous drives to watch sunsets. The decision to propose came naturally, not because of the bet's deadline looming, but because Raj couldn't imagine his life returning to its monochrome state without her. He spent weeks planning, thinking he needed to create some elaborate, expensive scenario. In the end, it happened on a regular Tuesday evening. They were walking through a park where they'd had their second date, the autumn leaves creating a carpet of gold and red beneath their feet. Priya was telling him about a new book series she was developing, her face animated with excitement. Raj stopped walking, causing Priya to look back at him questioningly. The setting sun painted everything in warm light, making her eyes sparkle. He'd prepared a speech, something poetic and carefully worded, but looking at her, all those practiced words fell away. "Marry me," he said simply, pulling out the ring he'd been carrying for weeks. "My life was all spreadsheets and business plans before I met you. Now it's full of color and surprise and joy. Marry me and keep teaching me how to see the world through your eyes." Priya's eyes widened, her sketchbook dropping from her hands. For a moment, everything was still. The leaves stopped falling. The world held its breath. Then she smiled, that warm, genuine smile that had first captivated him in the coffee shop. "Yes," she whispered, then louder, "yes." She threw her arms around him, and as he held her close, Raj felt a stab of guilt about the bet. But looking into her eyes, he knew this wasn't about winning anymore. Somewhere between spilled tea and spontaneous adventures, between business meetings and art galleries, he'd found something real. Their wedding was small, held in a garden filled with fairy lights and wildflowers. Raj's friends watched in amazement as their usually polished friend danced barefoot on the grass, his expensive suit jacket abandoned, looking happier than they'd ever seen him. What none of them knew, not even Priya, was that Raj had already drafted paperwork to donate his car collection to charity, not because he had to, but because he wanted to. He'd finally understood that the most valuable things in life couldn't be measured in dollars or horsepower. As they drove away from their wedding in his favorite vintage car, now decorated with Priya's hand-painted "Just Married" sign, Raj realized that what had started as a bet had become the biggest win of his life, just not in the way he'd expected. 6 months into their marriage, life had settled into a beautiful rhythm. Raj and Priya had moved into a sunny apartment that perfectly blended their worlds, his minimalist furniture now adorned with her colorful artwork, his home office sharing space with her creative studio. But as autumn turned to winter, tiny cracks began appearing in their perfect picture. It started with a mysterious package delivered to their door one morning. Raj signed for it while Priya was in the shower, curious about the publishing house logo on the box. Inside, he found advance copies of a children's book series, Priya's latest project that she hadn't told him about. "The Business of Love," read the title. Raj's heart skipped as he flipped through the pages. The story followed a workaholic businessman who learns to see the world differently through the eyes of an artist. The illustrations were unmistakable. The main character wore his favorite blue suit, drove cars that looked exactly like his collection, and even had his signature way of running his hand through his hair when stressed. "Oh, you weren't supposed to see those yet." Priya's voice came from behind him. She was wrapped in her paint-splattered robe, hair still damp. It was going to be a surprise. The publishing house loves the series. They're calling it a fresh take on modern love stories for children. Raj stared at the books, emotions swirling. "This is us? Our story?" Priya nodded excitedly. "You inspired me. The way you changed, how you learned to embrace a different kind of life. It's the perfect message for kids, that it's okay to be different, to change, to see the world in new ways." The irony hit him like a punch to the gut. Their love story, transformed into a tale of truth and transformation, was built on his lie. The bet that had started everything now felt like a shadow looming over their happiness. That evening, as Priya celebrated her book deal with their friends at their favorite restaurant, Raj couldn't focus. The books were already gaining attention online. Advance reviews praised their authenticity and heart. His phone kept buzzing with messages from his old friends, the ones who knew about the bet, sending him links to articles about the series. "Your wife turned your fake love story into a children's book," Dev texted with laughing emojis. "The irony is killing me." Raj excused himself from the table, needing air. Outside, the winter wind bit at his face as he paced the sidewalk. Through the restaurant window, he could see Priya animatedly sharing her illustrations with their friends, her face glowing with joy. She'd taken their story, what she thought was their story, and turned it into something beautiful that would touch countless children's lives. The guilt started affecting everything. Raj became distant, spending longer hours at the office. He started noticing things he'd overlooked before, how Priya's face would fall slightly when he couldn't remember details about their early dates, the ones he'd planned so carefully as part of the bet. She'd ask about his thoughts during their first meeting, and he'd have to fabricate emotions he hadn't actually felt back then. One morning, Priya found him in his home office, staring at an old photo from their wedding day. "Is everything okay?" she asked, placing a cup of tea beside him. "You've been somewhere else lately." "Just work stress," he lied, adding another brick to the wall of deception between them. But Priya, with her artist's eye for detail, wasn't easily fooled. She started noticing inconsistencies in his stories about their early relationship. The timeline of when he fell in love with her changed slightly each time he told it. His reactions to her book series seemed off. What should have been pure joy was tainted with something that looked like guilt. The breaking point came during a book reading at a local library. Priya was sharing her inspiration for the series with a group of eager children and their parents. "Sometimes love finds us in unexpected ways," she told them, showing an illustration of her character's first meeting with the businessman. "And it changes us for the better." A child raised her hand. "Did you spill tea on your husband in real life too?" "Yes," Priya laughed. "And he was wearing such an expensive suit, but instead of getting angry, he smiled. That's when I knew he was special." Raj, standing at the back of the room, felt sick. He remembered that day clearly, his anger at the ruined suit, how he'd only held back because of the bet. His genuine feelings had come later, but that first moment hadn't been the romantic meet-cute depicted in the book. That night, as they drove home in silence, Priya finally asked the question that had been building. "Why do you look so sad whenever someone mentions how we met? It's like you're carrying some heavy secret." Raj gripped the steering wheel tighter, the weight of his deception becoming unbearable. Their love had become real, the truest thing in his life. But it had grown from seeds of dishonesty, and now those roots threatened to destroy everything they'd built. As they pulled into their parking spot, Priya placed her hand on his. "Whatever it is, we can face it together. Just talk to me." Raj looked at their intertwined fingers, at the gold wedding band on his finger that had come to mean so much more than winning a bet. But before he could find the courage to speak, his phone lit up with a message that would change everything. It was from Karen, and Priya saw it before he could hide it. "Can't believe your bet turned into a children's book series. Life's got a sick sense of humor, doesn't it?" The message glowed on Raj's phone screen like a neon sign, impossible to ignore. Priya's hand trembled as she read it again, each word sinking in deeper. The parking garage's fluorescent lights cast harsh shadows across her face as she turned to look at him. "A bet?" Her voice was barely a whisper. "Our whole relationship was a bet." Raj reached for her hand, but she pulled away, unbuckling her seatbelt and stepping out of the car. The sound of her footsteps echoing in the concrete structure felt like a countdown to disaster. "Let me explain," he started, following her. "Yes, it started as a bet, but..." "But what?" Priya spun around, her eyes shining with tears. "But you fell in love for real? But you meant to tell me. Do you know what this means?" Her voice cracked. "My books, they're based on a lie. I've been telling children a story about truth and love, and it's all fake." The reality of what he'd done hit Raj full force. This wasn't just about their relationship anymore. Priya had turned their story into something bigger, something that was supposed to inspire others. Her reputation as an artist, her integrity, everything was now tainted. "The books aren't fake," he insisted. "The love in them is real. What we have now is real." "Now?" Priya laughed, but it was a hollow sound that bounced off the garage walls. "When exactly did it become real, Raj? When did you stop pretending? Was it before or after I shared our story with the world?" She walked to the elevator, pressing the button repeatedly as if it could make this moment end faster. Raj followed, his expensive shoes clicking on the concrete. "The first 3 months," he admitted, the truth spilling out. "It was a bet to marry the next single woman I met and stay married for a year. My car collection against Karen's vintage Mustang." The words sounded so shallow now, so meaningless compared to what he found with her. The elevator arrived with a cheerful ding that felt out of place in the heavy moment. Priya stepped in, but held up her hand when Ray tried to follow. "I need space. I need to think." As the elevator doors closed between them, Raj saw the moment their eyes met at the coffee shop playing in his mind, but now from her perspective. What she'd thought was a genuine connection had been a calculated move in a rich man's game. Upstairs in their apartment, Priya moved like a ghost, gathering essentials into a small bag. Her hands paused over their framed wedding photo, the one where they were both laughing at something Dev had said. Was he in on it too? Were they all watching and laughing? They knew about the bet, Raj admitted, but they stopped seeing it as a joke months ago. They could see how real it became. Priya picked up one of her advanced copybooks, flipping through the pages she poured her heart into. The illustrations that had once brought her so much joy now felt like evidence of her own naivety. "You know what hurts the most," she said, closing the book. "I thought I was special because I saw past your walls, past the businessman everyone else saw. But there were no walls. You were playing a role, giving me exactly what I wanted to see." "That's not true," Raj protested. "You did see the real me. You helped me become who I really am." "Did I? Or did you just become what you needed to be to win the bet?" She placed the book on the coffee table, aligning it perfectly with the edge. A habit she picked up from him. "I need to call my publisher. I can't promote these books knowing they're based on a lie." "Priya, please don't do that. Your career." "My career?" Her voice rose for the first time. "I built these stories on authenticity, Raj. Every parent, every child who reads them believes in the magic of unexpected love because I believed in it. How can I stand in front of them now?" She walked to her studio area, looking at the wall of sketches that chronicled their relationship. First date drawings, weekend adventure doodles, tiny moments she'd captured in her unique style. "I've been illustrating a fairy tale, but it was really just a business transaction." Raj watched helplessly as she pulled out her phone and drafted an email to her publisher. His mind raced for something to say, some way to fix this, but for the first time in his life, his business-trained brain failed him. There was no strategy for this, no calculated move to make it right. Priya grabbed her coat, the one he'd bought her for her birthday, with special pockets for her art supplies. "I'm going to stay with my sister. I need time to figure out how to handle this, professionally and personally." "I'll give up the cars," Raj blurted out. "I'll donate them all, not just because of the bet. I'll do anything." She paused at the door, her hand on the handle. "That's the problem, Raj. Everything you do now feels like part of the game." "I don't know what's real anymore." She took off her wedding ring and placed it on the entry table, "including us." The door closed softly behind her, but it might as well have been slammed. Raj stood in their suddenly quiet apartment, surrounded by the life they'd built together. Her half-finished sketches on the coffee table, his financial reports mixed with her art supplies, the walls where her colors had brightened his monochrome world. He picked up her wedding ring, still warm from her finger. Outside, the city continued its night rhythm, unaware that in one apartment, two worlds that had beautifully collided were now pulling apart. Raj's phone buzzed again, more messages from his friends who'd seen Priya's books. But now, looking at his expensive phone, his designer clothes, his carefully curated life, none of it seemed to matter. He'd won the bet months ago when she'd said, "I do," but standing alone in their apartment, he realized he might have lost something far more valuable than any car collection. On his desk, a post-it note in Priya's handwriting caught his eye. "Love isn't a business deal. It's a masterpiece painted with trust." She'd written it weeks ago, after teasing him about his overly analytical approach to planning their future. Now the words felt like both a goodbye and a wake-up call. The weeks following Priya's departure felt like walking through a fog. Raj went through the motions at work, attended meetings, made decisions, but everything felt hollow. Their apartment, once vibrant with her presence, now seemed to mock him with its half-empty spaces. Her art supplies still lay scattered in her studio area, untouched since she left. One morning, he found himself standing in his garage, staring at his car collection. Each pristine vehicle represented a victory, a deal closed, a milestone reached. But now they just reminded him of what he'd lost. "Sir," his assistant's voice crackled through his phone. "The Children's Hospital Board is still waiting for your response about their fundraising event." Raj had been automatically declining all charitable requests lately, too lost in his own troubles. But something about this one made him pause. He remembered Priya's excitement when she'd visit children's hospitals for book readings, how she'd say that art could heal hearts. "Send me the details," he said, making a decision that would change everything. The next day, he walked into the children's hospital, feeling out of place in his expensive suit. The walls were painted with cheerful murals, so different from his corporate world. A small girl in a wheelchair stopped to look up at him. "Are you lost?" she asked, clutching a familiar-looking book. Rage's heart skipped. It was one of Pryor's books. "Do you like that story?" he asked, kneeling down to her level. The girl nodded enthusiastically. "The businessman learns that love is more important than money. My mom says that's a good lesson." Her simple words hit harder than any business negotiation ever had. Standing up, Raj walked into the board meeting with a new purpose. Instead of just writing a check, he proposed something bigger. Over the next months, Raj transformed his entire life. He started a foundation that converted luxury cars into funding for children's art therapy programs. Each of his precious vehicles was sold, with every penny going to bring art and creativity to kids who needed it most. His business friends thought he'd lost his mind. "You're giving away your entire collection?" Dev asked incredulously over coffee. "Is this some elaborate plan to win her back?" "No," Raj replied, surprising himself with how much he meant it. "This isn't about winning anything anymore." He immersed himself in the work, learning about art therapy, sitting in on sessions where children used colors and shapes to express their feelings. He thought of Pryor constantly, but not with the desperate longing of the first weeks. Instead, he finally understood what she'd been trying to teach him all along. The foundation grew. Raj hired art teachers, bought supplies, and set up programs in hospitals across the city. He learned to see success differently, measuring it in smiles and healing rather than profit margins. One day, while helping a young boy mix colors for a painting, Raj caught his own reflection in the window. He hardly recognized himself. His tie was loose, his sleeves rolled up, and his hands were stained with paint. But his smile was genuine, reaching his eyes in a way it never had in his corporate headshots. The media picked up on the story, the venture capitalist who traded his luxury cars for children's art supplies. Journalists asked if he regretted giving up his collection. Raj would think about the shy smile of a child showing him their first painting and answer truthfully, "I gained more than I gave up." He kept track of Pryor through mutual friends and social media. She'd taken a break from publishing, focusing instead on teaching art to underprivileged kids in a different city. Her latest posts showed her students' work, messy, colorful, and full of heart, just like she'd taught him to be. 6 months after she left, Raj received an unexpected call from her publisher. They were planning a new series about healing through art and had heard about his foundation. Would he be interested in collaborating? "We're not asking you to write or illustrate," the publisher clarified. "Just share your experience of how art changes lives." The real story this time. Raj sat in his office, now decorated with children's artwork instead of business awards, and thought about how far he'd come. "The real story," he repeated softly. "Yes, I think it's time for that." That evening, he visited the hospital's art therapy room after hours. Sitting at the small tables where children created their masterpieces, he began to write. Not about the bet, or the cars, or even about losing Pryor. Instead, he wrote about transformation, about a man who had to lose everything to find what really mattered. He wrote about the young girl who taught him that purple and orange could live happily on the same page, breaking every rule of his color-coded world. About the teenage boy who showed him that sometimes the most beautiful art comes from the biggest mistakes. About all the little artists who helped him understand that life, like art, doesn't have to be perfect to be valuable. As he wrote, a paint-stained stuffed animal watched from the corner, a reminder of a lesson learned too late but taken to heart, that love, whether in art or life, can't be won like a business deal. It has to be created, stroke by stroke, day by day, with honesty and care. The transformation wasn't just about giving away his cars or starting a foundation. It was about becoming the person he'd only pretended to be for the bet, someone who could see beauty in imperfection, value in creativity, and worth in things that couldn't be measured in dollars. Raj closed his notebook and looked around the room, at the walls covered in children's artwork. Each piece told a story of healing, of expression, of growth. His own story was just one among many, but it had led him here, to this quiet moment of understanding. He pulled out his phone and looked at the last photo he and Pryor had taken together before everything fell apart. They were both laughing, unaware of what was coming. But for the first time, instead of feeling regret, Raj felt grateful. She had shown him a different way to see the world, and even though he'd lost her, he'd finally learned to see it clearly. 1 year after their wedding day, Raj found himself in Chicago, his heart beating faster as he approached the city's largest bookstore. The window display featured familiar artwork, Priya's new series about art therapy and healing. She was doing a reading today, and after months of transformation, he knew he had to be there. The children's section was packed with families, their excited chatter filling the air. Raj slipped into the back row, taking in the scene. Plush cushions were scattered on the floor where kids sat cross-legged, their parents standing behind them. The walls were decorated with children's artwork, some from Priya's students, others from his foundation's programs. Then she walked in and his breath caught. Priya looked different, her hair was shorter, and she carried herself with a new kind of confidence. She sat in the reading chair, surrounded by eager faces, and began to share her new story. "This book is about healing," she told the children. "About how making art can help us when we're sad or scared or confused. Sometimes the most beautiful pictures come from our biggest feelings." Raj watched as she engaged with the kids, answering their questions with the same warmth that had first drawn him to her. She'd always had this gift, making everyone feel heard and understood. After the reading, as parents lined up with their children for book signings, Raj remained in his seat. He noticed that Priya's new book had a dedication page, "For everyone who learns to paint their own truth." Finally, when the last family had left, Priya looked up and saw him. The bookstore seemed to grow quiet, though the children's laughter could still be heard from other sections. "I saw the article about your foundation," she said after a moment, her voice steady. "The art therapy programs, they're amazing." Raj stood, his hands in his pockets to keep from fidgeting. "I had a good teacher, someone who showed me that art isn't just about beauty, it's about truth." They found themselves at the store's small cafe, 2 cups of tea between them just like that first day. Through the window, Chicago's streets buzzed with life, so different from their old city, but somehow fitting for this new chapter. "I'm not here to win you back," Raj said, breaking the silence. I needed you to know that what you taught me wasn't wasted. The bet may have brought us together, but you showed me a way of living I never knew I needed." Priya wrapped her hands around her teacup, a habit he remembered so well. "When I left, I was so angry. Not just about the bet, but because I thought everything I believed about love and change was a lie." "And now?" Raj asked softly. She pulled out her sketchbook, a new one, he noticed, but still filled with her characteristic doodles. "I've been teaching art to kids who've been through tough times. They taught me something important. Sometimes people do change, but you can't change them. They have to find their own reason." "Like starting a foundation," Raj smiled slightly. "Like starting a foundation," she agreed. "I saw the videos of your art therapy sessions. That man sitting on tiny chairs, helping kids mix colors, that's not the same person who made that bet." They talked for hours, sharing stories of their time apart. Raj told her about the children in his programs, how their honesty and creativity had changed his whole worldview. Priya shared about her new teaching experiences, how losing their perfect love story had led her to find deeper, more meaningful stories to tell. As evening approached, they walked together through a nearby park. The autumn air felt crisp, leaves crunching under their feet, so similar to their first autumn together, yet everything was different. "Do you remember what you said in your proposal?" Priya asked suddenly. "About wanting me to teach you to see the world through my eyes." Raj nodded, the memory both sweet and painful. "I think," she said carefully, "you needed to learn to see it through your own eyes first. And you have." They stopped at a street artist's display, watching as he created vibrant cityscapes with spray paint. Raj noticed how the colors blended and clashed, creating something beautiful from chaos, just like life had done with their story. "I'm moving back," Priya said after a while. "The publisher wants me to expand the art therapy series, work with more programs, including yours, if you're interested." "As a business collaboration?" Raj asked, his heart beating faster. She turned to face him, her eyes clear and direct. "As a fresh start. No bets, no pretense. Just 2 people who've both grown and changed, seeing where it leads." Raj thought about the past year, about lost cars and found purpose, about children's laughter in art therapy rooms, and the messy beauty of starting over. "I'd like that," he said simply. They didn't kiss or make grand promises. Instead, they exchanged business cards, his new one with the Foundation's colorful logo and hers with tiny hand-drawn stars in the corners. It wasn't the ending either of them had expected, but maybe that was the point. As they parted ways that evening, Pryor handed him something, a sketch she'd done during their conversation. It showed two paths starting far apart, weaving through a complicated pattern, and finally meeting again. Sometimes, she said, the best stories aren't about where we start or even where we end up. They're about all the colors we add to each other's lives along the way. Reg watched her walk away, the sketch in his hand catching the last light of day. Their story hadn't ended with the bet, or even with her leaving. Instead, it had evolved into something real and honest, a masterpiece painted not with grand gestures or calculated moves, but with truth, growth, and the courage to begin again. He folded the sketch carefully and put it in his wallet, right where he'd once kept the paper with her number. Tomorrow, they would start their new chapter, not as characters in a bet gone wrong or a children's book about instant love, but as two people who had learned that the best stories, like the best art, come from the heart.